Hi there and welcome to this next video for equine education. And in this video I'm going to focus more on the large intestine of the horse. In the previous video we talked about the horse's natural environment and we talked about digestion up to the point of the small intestine. So the large intestine of the horse is comprised of the cecum, the large colon and the small colon. And the difference between the large intestine and the small intestine is that in the small intestine, food particles are broken down by enzymes that are secreted into the small intestinal environment, and those enzymes break those foodstuffs down into smaller molecules that are then absorbed across the gut wall. In the large intestine, there are millions and millions of microbes present, predominantly bacteria, but also protozoa and fungi. And what we know about those microbes is they are best suited to break down fibre. So the horse, as we've talked about in its natural environment, is designed to eat low quality and low nutritional quality fibre on an almost continual basis. And those microbes in the large intestine, they don't break down the food in the same way as the enzymes do in the small intestine. They actually make use of the feed particles as a substrate for themselves, and they release a byproduct, an end product of that digestion process. And those end products are predominantly volatile fatty acids. And what happens with those volatile fatty acids is the horse then absorbs those across the gut wall and uses them as an energy source. And so that's how horses make use of fibre as an energy source. Now we're know a bit more, or actually quite a lot more in recent times, about the microbial populations in the horse's hindgut. Mostly bacteria at the moment. Most of the work's been done looking at the different bacterial populations, but what we do know is they're vast, and we know that microbes are so important for your horse's health and well-being. And we know from human studies that microbes affect us in all different ways. They're so important for our health and also for our behaviour. The other thing that we know about the microbes that are present in the large intestine of the horse is that they need time to adapt to a new diet. So for example, if you had your horse out at pasture and they were grazing 24 hours a day, and then there was a change in circumstances or a change in weather, for example, and you decided then you're going to bring your horse indoors, house for significant portions of the day, several hours, even sort of 12 to 16 hours, for example, and provide your horse with hay, then that's a significant dietary change and also management change for your horse. So although the grass is fibre, contains a lot of fibre, and the hay is fibre, it's different forms of fibre, and so those microbes need time to adapt to that change in diet. And so that sudden change in diet may put your horse at more risk of developing a gastrointestinal disturbance and possibly developing colic, for example, because not only has diet changed, management has changed. So the horse is not moving about as much because it's not pasture for as much of the day, and is also then receiving a change in diet quite suddenly. So it's better where you can to sort of build that up gradually. So if it's getting to the time of the year, for example, then you want to bring your horse in, maybe start to gradually bring your horse in for a few hours per day, give your horse access to hay, and then sort of build that up over a period of a week or so. And sometimes I appreciate that's not always possible or practical, but it's just being mindful that to trying to put things in place that make those dietary changes less abrupt. The other dietary change that's abrupt is if you take your horse suddenly from a forage only diet, introduce concentrates. So concentrates that may be a commercial foodstuff that contains cereal grains and other ingredients. What we know is that if horses haven't had concentrate in their diet for a period of months, then the enzymes that are secreted into the small intestine become less, so they drop. and the levels that are secreted, because they're not being presented with any of those concentrates to digest. So if you suddenly then add a lot of concentrate into your horse's diet, that overwhelms the capacity of the small intestine, and those concentrates travel to the large intestine. So it's much better to gradually increase the amount of concentrate offered to allow those enzymes to build up, to prevent those feedstuffs that contain higher levels of starch, and I'll talk about starch in subsequent videos, going into the large intestine. Because what I want to make everyone aware of and highlight is the large intestine is designed to digest fibre. And so whilst the microbes can adapt and can easily digest starch, what happens is you get a shift in the type of microbes that break down the starch compared to the fibre. You get more microbes that are in the group that's called lactic acid bacteria. So I talked before about the fibre degrading bacteria releasing volatile fatty acids as an end product. Lactic acid bacteria produce lactic acid as a byproduct, and lactic acid is a much stronger acid than your volatile fatty acids. The pH of the horse's hindgut should sit somewhere around about 6.7. And when you get a lot of starch entering the hindgut, and you get a proliferation of lactic acid bacteria and more lactic acid being produced, then you see a drop in that pH. And when you get a drop down to closer to a pH value of 6, that can make your horse very unwell. It can cause what's called acidotic conditions in the hindgut. And then the fibre degraders that don't do well in that more acidic environment, they begin to die off. So the horse is less able to digest the fibre that is coming into the hindgut, and much better adapted to the starch diet, but then you're getting this drop in pH, and that horse is at a greater risk of developing health issues such as colic. So it's extremely important to do things gradually, and also to think about how different types of feeds have been introduced. So I've talked about going from grass to hay, I've talked about going from hay to adding in concentrates. The other thing that's of note is if you've got a horse that's performing at a reasonably high level, high intensity exercise, and it's having a lot of starchy feeds in its diet to meet its energy requirements, and then suddenly for some reason that horse has maybe had an injury and has to go on box rest, the advice will always be to drop down the concentrate portion and increase the forage fraction of the diet for a horse on box rest. But that again is a change in diet. So whilst that's something that's unavoidable, because you're kind of balancing between the risk of not dropping the concentrate with the risk of dropping it and increasing the forage, and possibly more risk of colic, you also just have to be mindful that that's a change, and just be careful to kind of look for signs of gastrointestinal discomfort, and just make sure the horse has got plenty of access to water as well. So I've touched a bit there on the hindgut and some issues that can occur with sudden dietary changes. I hope you've enjoyed this and found it helpful, and I'll talk about more nutrition related topics in future videos. Bye for now.